here, your Thrifty Apprentice. Happy Wednesday, everyone, and welcome back to another Thrifty Review. In today's quick review, we are taking a look at Lukas Aquarelle 1862 12 tube count of professional grade watercolors. I received this set, or should I say I purchased this set, I want to say back towards the beginning of 2023. I just got a chance to pull them out right before Inktober. We did an unboxing video, which I'll be sure to link, along with a preliminary demo. And then I took time throughout the month of October during Inktober to use the paints here and there just to test them out so that I could get some pretty good practice with them before I decided to offer a review. So, as I said earlier, we've already done the unboxing, so I won't go through much as far as the unboxing is concerned. That way we can get right on to talking about the product and looking at some of the work that I've done with them. What I will recap is that each of the tubes are 10 milliliters, so you're going to get pretty decent amount of paint in each of the tubes. The back of the box does have a color swatching along with the names of each color. Oh, and I'm making a mess. The tubes themselves are metal with a screw-off cap, which was pretty easy to get off. There was no foil covering the neck of the tube, and the consistency of the paint was pretty standard across all 12 tubes. A bit of variation here and there, but for the most part, I didn't have any difficulty with that. I think there may have been one that had like a little major binder separation, and that could simply be because it sat on the shelf at Jerry's for a minute before I purchased it. But whatever the case is, I just mixed that binder back into the actual pigment and paint, and it worked just fine with no problems. Now, each of the tubes, if you remember from the unboxing video, did have a little printing overlay issue where you could not see the pigment numbers or like the AP seal of approval. I mean, you can, but it's really, really light, and it carries over into the actual front printing for the tube. So I did have to go to the Lukas website in order to source the pigment numbers for each of the colors, but that is available. And that's not to say that each set that's purchased will have that printing issue that mine did, but that is something that I wanted to point out. Lukas does run on a 3-star light fast rating, 1, 2, and 3, 3 being the most permanent, 1 being the most fugitive, and each of the tubes do visibly show the light fast rating for each of the paints. So you are going to definitely get all of the information that you would normally expect from a professional grade of paints included with these, even if you have to source the website just to make out what some of that information may be. Now, I did buy the tubes because I was initially planning to make separate palettes, separate 12 half pan poured palettes of either 4th or half pans in order to list on Etsy, or maybe even for some limited edition channel specific, not subscription, but art boxes that I'm planning for 2024. So that's something that you guys can look forward to if it sounds like something that may interest you. So what I did was I panned the paints up in a 12 half pan palette. Now this palette actually was one that I got from Temu with some really cheap paints in it. The paints were, you know, cheap. So they weren't anything that I was going to keep and continue to use. So I did pry those paint pegs out of each of the palette holders, put it into a different container so that I can either donate it or give it away at a different date. And then I simply panned my Lukas into this particular panning set. So this is not something that comes with it, but you can find these readily available on Amazon, AliExpress, maybe even at your local art supply store, where you can get a really cheap 12 half pan palette in order to pan them up. So as I said earlier, the consistency was pretty consistent across across the 12 tubes, with the exception of 1, maybe 2, which had a little bit of binder issue, but it was no big deal. I just took a toothpick and mixed those back up. Okay, so that's pretty much the physicalities of the paints. Let's move on right now into the demo. And then after the demo, we'll jump back into talking about the quality of the paint, and I'll give you guys my thoughts and whether or not I recommend them. To start the demo off, we are actually going to be drawing together. I'm drawing directly onto the paper I'm working on. This is the Creative Mark Universal Mixed Media paper. This video was shot during Inktober. I do believe this prompt was time, if I'm not mistaken, and I felt like it was a wonderful opportunity for me to test the paints again, shoot this demo for the review, as well as use them in a mixed media aspect in conjunction with Van Gogh watercolors. I'm actually sketching with a Staedtler tinted watercolor pencil. I think it's like a grayish green tone. I'm going to be using a HB pencil in the drawing as well. And then we're going to jump into painting. So you're seeing me do a lot of erasing as I sketch this out. And I normally sketch on a blank piece of paper, then transfer it into the book that I'm going to be working in. So this is the part of my work you guys normally don't get to see much, but I do draw it out. I decided that I would go ahead and just show you guys how I make a chain. And I decided I was painting a kind of a watch, a pocket watch that had Roman numeral numbers on the front of the facing, and there's a key on the end. Just thought it was something really whimsical and fun. I found a little reference image on the internet, and I just figured that this would be a really good representation of the prompt time. Now, I'm starting off with those Van Gogh granulating watercolors, which in all honesty are a pretty decent watercolor to me. I'm going to eventually get around to doing a review of those, and I was kind of testing those during Inktober as well. So I started with more of the green tone in the set, and I say set, but it's actually 8 tubes that I bought open stock from, like, I want to say it was my local Joann's, and they carry Van Gogh watercolors, and they happen to have the dusk colors from that line, which granulate. So I'm mixing greens and blues and purples and a little brown into that shadow in order to create texture and to give it depth. So the granulating watercolors are going to be what I use to put in the shadow. And then we're going to actually go in with the Lukas and mixing in some of the Van Gogh at points in order to actually paint the watch itself. So the face of the watch turned out to be a mixture of, I want to say that's a burnt sienna in that set. I do not think it is a yellow ochre. I could be mistaken. But I used that, and then I mixed in a little ultramarine blue in order to give it some shadow. Dropped in a few drops of green paint, a few drops of red, kind of a off magenta tone, just so I could give some color to the face of the watch. Then I darkened that original mixture that I used to paint the face, a little bit more sienna in it, a little bit more yellow. And then I used that brown from the Van Gogh set that I have curated there. And it gave me more of a brass tone, which is what I was going for. I was trying not to make the watch look gold. I really wanted to give more of a brass feel to it. So I started to paint in the actual watch, not the face, but the metal part of the watch. And it was giving me the color that I wanted, so I darkened it a little bit more and decided to add a little bit more definition to the outline. I wanted to definitely look like the watch was raising from the surface that it was drawn on. And then taking the original color that I used around the outline of the outside of the watch, I started to paint in the chain. Now, I did mix in a little green. As you can see, it almost has sort of a green undertone to it. I thought it just kind of gave the watch a little bit more of a rustic feel, made it look a little bit older. At least that's what I was attempting to pull off with it. So I'm just going to take my time and go around and base in the first layer of paint for the chain. And the key is going to actually be the same color. We're just going to add a little bit more definition a little later on to make it stand out more. And here I'm just using up the rest of that mixture that I have on my palette. So I ended up putting down another small layer, another small wash of color on top of that chain. Now jumping in with a mixture of the purple, brown, and blue, because I was just going for something dark and I'm trying to use the colors that I already have on my palette. I am painting in the Roman numerals that are on the face. And then I decided I did not want to try to go around that entire watch painting in all those Roman numerals. So I just put in little marks to indicate where the numbers would be, and then I decided to paint in the hands. Now at this particular point, I've mixed ultramarine light from the Lukas set with the ultramarine color from the Van Gogh set, as well as the yellow ochre sienna color from the Lukas set. Yeah, that was a mouthful, guys. But that's what I'm using to. That's what I use to paint in those hands on the watch, just for a little bit more unity across the entire piece, which is why you continue to see me use the exact same colors. Now, I originally started out with a number 2 round synthetic golden Tacklon brush. Here I've switched over to a liner brush. This is a squirrel, synthetic squirrel. This is part of Lindsay Wyrick brush set from Craft Ammo. And these are really decent range of brushes. I've been using them quite a lot since I got them. I'm not sure if they're still available. I mean, you guys can go over to Craft Ammo, check it out in the search engine. Just type in Lindsay Wyrick or maybe the Frugal Crafter and see what pops up. But this is her set of brushes that was produced by Craft Ammo, and for all intents and purposes, they're a pretty nice set of brushes. Here I switched back over to that number 2 round that I was originally using, and I'm basing in a darker saturated tone to add some shadow around the watch and into the chain. And then I actually grabbed an indigo pencil from my Prismacolor set and sharpened it really sharp. I'm going in and I'm actually outlining the shadow. I kind of wanted to clean up it. I feathered a little too much for me, and that has a lot to do with this paper. This paper takes all media pretty robustly. Now with watercolors, you can use light watercolors on it. I wouldn't do too heavy of washes, but you can do watercolors, as you can see. Went in with a super black fine liner because it was Inktober. So I wanted to darken up some areas, give it a little bit more definition, make it stand out. And I wanted some saturation to be sharper because I knew I was going to be going in with a white gel pen, and I really wanted that contrast to make the picture pop and to make the watch just look really wholesome and round and 3D. So I'm just sharpening up some areas, some lines along the chain. Now, I did not actually cover any of the paint. I made sure to fine line outside of everything I had painted, which is why a lot of times when I'm doing an ink and wash, especially doing Inktober, I will do the composition first and fine line at the end. That way, I can make sure to encompass the entire composition, which tends to grow as I work. Here I'm going in with some colored pencils to add highlights, some Prismacolor, some Brute Furners, and then I'm going in with a white gel pen, which is going to add the final major highlights, and I'm going to be sure to hit each link of that chain. See you on the other side. All right, friends, hopefully you enjoyed that demo, and we are just going to jump straight into it. So I swatched the colors in my Painter's Color Diary, which is 100% cotton 9x12 watercolor paper with removable sheets. And I swatch all of my professional grade paints in this particular book so that they'll all have the same chance of performance as far as the paper go. I swatched them down in water swatches. Then I went back on and did a glazing effect with each one of them, making sure to go over the black line so that I could check opacity with the paints. The truth of the matter is most of these paints are pretty transparent to semi-transparent. I didn't experience much opaqueness with them. As you can see from the black line, you get some pretty clean lines there, with the exception of like the lemon yellow permanent, which had a bit of opacity to it. The yellow ochre had a little opacity to it, which was to be expected. And the ivory black, for what it's worth, got as opaque as it could, considering the fact that Lukas 1862 colors seem to be really soft and subtle. Now, I'm not saying that they aren't pretty, because they are, and they are saturated, But compared to most of the other professional grade paints that I tend to like to use, which are really bright and vibrant and punchy, say like Core, Mission Gold, Turner, Shinhan, these are much more muted or much more docile than those paints, but they're still really saturated and pretty. They covered really well. They reactivated really well once dried down into a palette. I didn't have any issue with that. I didn't experience any gumminess or gloopiness on the brush, although I did mix most of the paint out on a palette as I was testing it out, just to be sure I didn't have anything clog up on my brush. Now, the black is not that, it's not the most opaque black I've ever seen in a watercolor set. And the white itself, although it's listed as opaque white, is not necessarily the most opaque white I've ever seen. However, I do think that it acts really well in mixing body into the other shades that are included in the set, in case you wanted to go for a more gouache feel or more pastel feel, which I'll also throw out. With these colors being as soft as they are, mixing them into pastel actually makes really pretty colors. I also swatched them out on a little swatch card that I would be able to include in the palette that I use them in, because I don't normally just have the big swatch books sitting around. I put down a black marker line in order to test opacity once again. And as you can see, I get the same results here. The lemon yellow, the yellow ochre, the ivory black of all seem to be the ones that are more semi-transparent versus being completely transparent. So that's something to keep in mind as you go throughout deciding if you want these. Now, as I said earlier, the pigment numbers were kind of obscured, excuse me, on the tube. So I did go to Lukas' website in order to source the pigment numbers for each one of the paints included in the 12 tube set. I will say this: the majority of them are single pigment. There's only 1, 2, 3 pigments that are more than a single pigment, 3 colors included, excuse me, that are more than single pigment, and they happen to be the colors that you would typically expect to be more than a single pigment. Of course, the opaque white is made up of PW5 and PW6, which are pretty common white pigments. The Payne's Gray is a 3 pigment color made up of a red 176, a blue 15:1, and then a PBK7, which is a common black color. It happens to be the same pigment that makes up the ivory black. And then, of course, the burnt umber is also 3 pigments containing PBK7 as well, PR176. And then the difference between it and the Payne's Gray is that the Payne's Gray has PB15:1, and the burnt umber has PY155, which of course we know is a yellow pigment. Now, the thing about dual, triple, and beyond pigment colors is that they can tend to mix mud if you use too many colors in a mixture, simply because you do have so many pigments included in one particular paint. However, I will say I did not experience much mud mixing any of these at all, even with them being more than single pigment colors. So I did a little color mixing. I was able to pull out primaries from the 12 set. So if you want to just go down to 3 primary tubes and use that to mix all of your colors, you could, and they are gonna mix really cleanly and make real clean, decent looking colors. I really love the green I was able to mix from the lemon permanent and the cyan. Now the thing is, cyan is not normally a color I tend to use, and Lukas happens to be one of the only professional palettes that I've seen that readily includes that color. I've noticed that color is also included in their studio watercolor set, and the cyan is also included as the primary blue in their studio gouache set. So that's definitely a pigment that is used universally across their sets in their brands. Got a pretty decent purple, and then an orange here using the magenta and the yellow, and then a cyan and the magenta gave me that beautiful purple. So you can definitely pull out colors for primaries and mixing. Guys, forgive any noise you hear in the background. We have maintenance outside doing lawn care, so you may hear a lawnmower here or there. I was able to mix some pretty decent dark tones from here, sort of Payne's gray blackish tones. Here I used the 3 primaries in order to get a pretty decent soft gray. This particular one was me using the ultramarine light as well as the burnt umber, which gave me a really cool gray. And I don't know if you guys can see that, but you can actually almost see where the burnt umber started to separate, and you can see a little of the brown in it, which I thought was pretty cool. And then here, this desaturated green, dark, excuse me, I want to say I mixed it from a red and a green, if I'm not mistaken. But with that said, you can get some dark, decent colors across the range. Here I blended all 12 colors together. Now this is a really cheap cellulose paper, and I think that the paints performed well on this paper, but I do think that they perform better on like watercolor paper, cellulose, or 100% watercolor paper. Now we're going to be taking some look at some paintings that were done with these, some on watercolor paper, some on mixed media paper, but I do believe that the paints performed pretty universally across all grades of paper that I tried with them. All right, so that's pretty much the mixing. Now I did not do a salt test individually or a lift test individually for this set, simply because I was going to be doing so much practical use painting and getting all of the experience that I needed from that. So let's just kind of jump right into looking at some of the artwork that I produced with them, while also saying that I do believe that the pigment makeup of this particular set is pretty stable. Now, am I saying it's the best set in the entire world? I guess it depends on who you're talking about and who's using it. For my particular use of watercolors and how I like to use them and how I like for my end result to come out, they are a bit soft for me. That's not to say that I won't use them, but they definitely wouldn't be the first ones that I run to. That in no means diminishes the fact that I believe that they are a really decent quality professional watercolor set. Maybe just not the very first one I would recommend. So in the unboxing video, we did this particular painting, which was sort of a see-through lotion bottle, soap dispenser. I was really working on glass at the point. I was working on trying to get metallic effects and shine. And I think the paints worked really well. They covered really well. I didn't have any issues with lifting where I needed to lift. I didn't have any issues with glazing or layering. And it didn't lift the layers up under it. They glazed really, really well. They worked really well in combination with the bleed-proof white and a white gel pen. They're just really soft. They're just really soft. And this bottle is a little off its mark. I didn't realize it until after I had finished this composition. But overall, the composition was really fun. I think it was a great experience for the first time that I used the paints. And it did kind of get me pumped to use the paints in other aspects. So then the next thing I did was the very first prompt for Inktober, which was Dream. And in that prompt, I did a dream catcher. And I used the Lukas 1862 along with Creative Mark, super black fine liners, and a little bleed proof white, and I think maybe a Prismacolor pencil. Again, the paints reacted really well on this paper, and I was actually surprised because I noticed that they seemed to be a little bit more muted on this cellulose paper when I was doing the color mixing than they were on the 100% cotton watercolor paper when I did the swatching, versus the cellulose watercolor paper from me doing the swatching. So definitely think in this aspect they worked better on the 100% cotton watercolor paper versus this really student grade cheap cellulose paper. I think this is half of one of those Masters Touch Fine Art Studio ready cut watercolor cards that you can just paint a card with, and I think that's what that is. This is Creative Mark Universal Mixed Media Paper, and I actually think they work better on the mixed media paper than they do on the cellulose watercolor paper, but not as well as they do on the 100% cotton watercolor paper. So I think that's something to keep in mind. So the next painting that I did with them was day 3 of Inktober. The prompt was Path. Now, as I said in the Inktober flip through, I was not super happy with the way this particular composition came out. And I am going to be going back to do some reworking of this one eventually. Just to add a little bit more saturated color, try to give a little bit more contrast to the background so that the foreground stands out more. Now, I use the Elegant Rider in combination with the Lukas watercolors here and the Super Black Fine Liners. The products play well together. It's just that the Lukas is so soft that the Elegant Rider colors seem to soften them up more, which is why I did not get the saturation level that I wanted. Now, that's not to say that there's a huge shift from wet to dry, because there isn't, excuse me. The paints are already soft, and I did not notice a huge shift. And this was an okay composition, but like I said, it's something I definitely want to go back and retry. And then, of course, I painted the demo that we saw in this video today, where we did the stopwatch. This was for, I forget what day of Inktober this was for, but the prompt was chain. And I thought that it would be a great chance for me to see how the paints work in a mixed media aspect on mixed media paper in combination with other products. So here, or other watercolor products. So here you're going to have the Lukas 1862 professional paints. You're going to have Van Gogh granulating watercolors. There's like 8 of them. And I bought them open stock and panned them and made a little 8-color palette of granulating watercolors. So I used those granulating colors in combination with the Lukas 1862. That way I could get texture. What I do notice about the Lukas is that they all seem to dry down pretty much the same. There was not a lot of diversity in the way the paint looked once it's dry, like you can get in other paint sets, you know. And that's not to say that's the case with the entire range of Lukas paints. I'm just specifically talking about the 12 tube set, keeping in mind that companies, especially when they're producing a professional product, the lower count sets, the 12 and the 15 counts, tend to have more of their single pigment colors, and it tends to be more of the light fast colors. Well, that's been my experience anyway. So again, I do not think that it's a bad set as far as the pigment makeup is concerned. I agree with what their light fast ratings for most of those pigments are without any argument. I just feel like they are really soft, and they didn't offer me much difference in texture as far as the paint is concerned, which is why I coupled them with the Van Gogh granulating watercolors in this demo. I actually love the way this came out. It wasn't necessarily what I originally envisioned in my head, but as I painted and just let the composition develop on its own, I was eventually satisfied with the way that it came out. And you can see here in that shadow how beautiful those Van Gogh watercolors mixed with the Lukas to give you such a soft and textured effect. So I think they worked super well in combination with the Van Gogh watercolors. With that said, I didn't have any issues with this, and I think of all the Inktober drawings that I did for October, this was one of my favorites. So those are just some of the pieces that I've done as I was painting, trying to get some experience with these paints in order to offer the review. So just a really quick recap, because I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. The paints are soft. Most of them are single pigment. They have really good light fast ratings, which based on the pigment information provided, I would definitely be able to agree with. There's not a huge shift from wet to dry. They re-wet really well when you dry them down in a palette, and they paint out just as beautifully from dried down paints as they do using them directly fresh from the tube, in my opinion. They mixed really well. You get a pretty diverse range of colors in the 12 set. And I didn't really find any issues. Not many at all. My only qualms would be is that they are not as bright and punchy as most professional paints that I'm used to using. And they did not offer too much textural difference. But there are a lot of watercolor sets out there that's like that. So I don't necessarily say that's a con. I just think it's something to keep in mind. Now, the 12 tube 10 milliliter set is currently listed on Amazon for like $56 if I'm not mistaken, which when you divide out over 12 tubes, put them at about $4.75 a tube. And I actually think that that's not a bad price for a professional grade of paint, especially when you think about when you buy paints open stock, what a tube of professional paint can run you, especially when you're talking about a tube as big as 10 milliliters. And of course, when you buy paints in a set, you do typically get them at a better deal than when you buy them open stock. Now, of course, Lukas is available open stock through many different sites. Jerry Autorama is the one that I deal with the most as far as them. And I do think that they may be like the big box art store that kind of caters to selling Lukas. I know you can find them on Amazon, and I'll be sure to link both places. You're probably going to get them a few dollars cheaper on Jerry's than you will on Amazon. You're just going to get them much quicker using Amazon, and you will not have to pay shipping and handling, especially if you're a Prime member. So I feel like all of that is something to think about when you're considering whether or not you want to add these paints to your art supply collection. So there you have it, guys. There's my thoughts and recommendations on this particular paint set. Hopefully you heard, saw, picked up on some information that you found helpful, useful, or you just simply enjoyed hanging out for another demo and review. If you did, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel or returning and haven't subscribed, please go ahead and subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you will be aware when the new content comes out. Go ahead and share the video. Sharing is caring, and maybe there's someone else out there who would love to hear this review on this particular set of professional paints. You can hit up the comment section. Let me know. What did you think of this review? What do you think of the paints? Have you used them? What's your experience? You guys know I love conversing with you, and I would love to hear what you have to say. You can hit up the video description for all of the relevant links, the Thrifty Apprentice sponsored Facebook group, where we do all things artsy and crafty, and all artists and crafters are welcome, where we respect each other and learn and grow in a very artsy atmosphere. You can find the link for the most recommended product list, where you're going to get great quality products like this that are not really going to break the bank. Even if they're professional quality, I do try to make sure that I keep them in an affordable price range when I'm recommending things. You'll also find the links for both the Patreon and the Etsy shop, where you can support the channel if you decide to, and it helps me continue to purchase all of these great products that I continue to test and unbox and review for you guys, so that it can hopefully save you $1 or $2, especially if the product is not something that's going to suit your art style. Thank you guys so much for joining me here, and remember, as I tell you at the end of every single video, just keep painting and crafting.